She was sitting on a bench outside the Mulberry Inn with 3 bags stacked beside her and my granddaughter pressed against her side. And the first thing I thought when I saw them was not what happened. I already knew what had happened. The first thing I thought was, they made the same mistake everyone makes. They forgot who I am. I'd been driving back from a meeting on Abercorn Street when my phone rang. My daughter's voice, barely there, telling me she was outside the inn, that she didn't know where else to go. I didn't ask questions. I told her to stay put. I told her I was 4 minutes away. My granddaughter, 5 years old, sat on top of the biggest bag with her arms wrapped around a small stuffed horse, the kind with button eyes and a yarn mane. You grab what matters when someone hurries you out the door. You don't have time to think. You just grab the horse and go. I pulled to the curb and stepped out. My daughter looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair still half-pinned from where she'd been rushed, and she was trying very hard to look like a woman who was holding herself together. She wasn't holding it together, but she was still standing, and that meant something. What happened? I didn't need to ask, but I asked anyway because she needed to say it out loud. She said I embarrassed the family name. My daughter's voice was flat and quiet. She said I never belonged in that house, that I came from nothing and would always be nothing. My husband, he didn't say a word. He stood in the doorway and let her do it. His mother had their housekeeper stack my bags on the porch. She looked down at my granddaughter, who was watching me with wide, serious eyes, still holding the horse tight. She told me if I caused any trouble, she'd make sure I never worked in interior design in this city again. I crouched down to my granddaughter's level. "You hungry, sweetheart?" She nodded, very solemn. "Good, let's go get something to eat." I picked up 2 of the bags. "Both of you, get in the car." My daughter started to say something. She always does when she's trying to apply logic to something that was never meant to be logical, trying to find sense in a situation designed to leave her senseless. And I said, "We can talk in the car. Right now we're going." She nodded. She picked up my granddaughter. They got in. People ask me later how I could be so calm. They think calm means you don't feel it. It doesn't. I felt every bit of what it meant for my daughter to be put on a public sidewalk with her child like furniture that didn't match the room anymore. I felt it the way you feel something you already knew was coming. Not surprise, but the cold, settled weight of confirmation. I'd been watching my daughter's mother-in-law for 2 years. That's what my daughter didn't know. That's the part I need to explain. When my daughter came to me and said she was serious about someone from the Hale family, one of Savannah's old real estate dynasties, a name you'd see on preservation plaques and charity programs downtown, I smiled and said, "Tell me about him." Then, that same evening, I made a call. My investigator found a first wife within 48 hours, found the police report she'd filed, found that it had gone nowhere, found the financial records that told a story no one had bothered to finish reading. But here's what I also found: the Hale family's historic property on the Isle of Hope. The main house, the carriage houses, the land that ran down to the water. That land had been held in a property trust since 1994. Meridian Property Holdings, registered in Delaware. The Hale family had been leasing it for 31 years, paying into an account they'd never successfully traced to any individual. They'd never traced it to me. I purchased that trust in 2001. I was 43 years old, recently divorced, running a small commercial real estate firm from a 2-room office on Bay Street. I acquired it through a holding company because I understood, even then, that power is most useful when it's invisible, when it doesn't announce itself, when it waits. My daughter didn't know any of this. I kept my business separate from my personal life by design. She grew up watching me work. She knew we were comfortable. She did not know the full picture, and I had reasons for that. Good reasons. Children who understand the full weight of what their parents carry sometimes make choices based on that. Wait, choices they might not have made otherwise. I wanted my daughter to build her own life, to love who she loved without calculating what I might have to offer. She'd chosen my son-in-law, and I had given his family 4 years to show me who they were. They'd shown me. His mother had shown me more. I drove us home to my house on East Gaston Street, the narrow one with the wisteria at the gate. I showed them to the back bedroom. My granddaughter was asleep before I finished pulling the curtains, the horse tucked firmly under one arm. My daughter sat on the edge of the bed staring at her hands. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she said. "You don't have to know tonight." She looked at me. She said my husband would file for full custody of Willow, that the courts in this county. "She has connections," she said. She made it sound like it was already decided. I know what she made it sound like. I sat beside her. That's what women like her do. They want you to feel like the walls are already closing in, like the decision's been made, before you've even had a chance to fight. I held her hands in mine. It hasn't been made. Not even close. She nodded, but her eyes weren't sure. After she fell asleep, I went downstairs. My investigator answered on the second ring. He'd worked with me for 11 years, and he already knew the shape of what I was going to say. Pull everything on the Hale estate finances. Every refinancing document in the past 3 years. Loan applications, signature records, credit accounts. I paused, and find the first wife. Find out where she is now. He said he'd have something by morning. I stood at the kitchen window, looking out at the garden, the jasmine climbing the back fence, the pots of rosemary I'd planted 20 years ago and somehow never managed to kill. I'd made this house into something livable after my marriage ended. I'd done it slowly, stubbornly, without asking anyone's permission. My son-in-law's mother thought she was dealing with a woman who had nowhere to turn. She had no idea she was standing on my land. By 7 the next morning, my investigator was at my kitchen table with a folder and 2 cups of coffee he'd made himself because he knew where everything was. He slid the first document across to me without a word. A refinancing application filed 8 months prior against the Hale family business accounts. Guarantor, my daughter. Signature, my daughter's. Loan amount, $1.8 million. My daughter had never signed that document. She'd been in Hilton Head the week it was dated, at a design conference. I had the hotel receipt in my files because she'd asked me to hold it for her taxes. Forgery, he said quietly. Complete, I said. What else? The first wife, her name was Celine, lived in Bluffton now, ran a small pottery studio, had gotten out of the marriage after 18 months and lost most of what she'd brought into it. She'd filed a police report, dropped it when the family threatened a countersuit. She'd been quiet ever since. Same pattern as my daughter? Identical. He looked at me steadily. Financial control within 6 months, isolation from family and friends. Verbal degradation. She used the same phrases your daughter used. Then the removal, the false accusation, the legal threat. He paused. Your son-in-law didn't invent any of it. He learned it. From his mother. I closed the folder. My son-in-law's mother had run this system at least twice. She'd selected women with talent and promise, women with something worth taking, and she'd run them through it until they came out the other side, smaller and quieter and easier to discard. She'd tried it with my daughter. I called my attorney from the back porch while the garden was still in morning shadow. She'd been my legal counsel for 14 years and did not rattle easily. I need a restraining order filed today. Custodial protection for my granddaughter, and I need you to look at a forgery case. I gave her the outline. Can you be here by noon? She said she'd be there by 11. Then I called Lyle Kimberling at Coastal Heritage Bank. We'd done business together, going on 2 decades, back when I was running everything out of that 2-room office, and every month was a careful calculation. Lyle, I said, I need you to pull the Meridian Property Holdings file, the Hale family lease account. A pause. That's a significant property relationship, ma'am. I'm aware. The lease renewal comes up in 60 days. I won't be renewing. I'd like formal non-renewal notice filed with the county recorder's office today. He said he understood. He said he'd have it done. By afternoon, my son-in-law had called my daughter's phone 5 times. On the 5th, she looked at me. I nodded. She answered on speaker. Dara. His voice was careful, measured the way someone measures words when they're reading from a script. My mother is upset, but she's willing to let this go if you come home and apologize. One apology. That's all anyone's asking. My daughter looked at me. I didn't speak. I waited. I'm not apologizing, she said. I didn't do anything. Be reasonable. You know how she is. You've always found a way to. She had me escorted off the property in front of our daughter. The measured quality dropped from his voice. My mother's attorney has documentation showing you've been emotionally unstable. There are witnesses. If you're not home by tomorrow, we file for emergency custody of Willow. My attorney, sitting at the kitchen table, wrote fabricated on her legal pad and drew a circle around it. I have documentation too, my daughter said, and so does my mother. Silence. Tell your mother to stay out of this. She's already in it, my daughter said, and she ended the call. She put the phone down and looked at me, and her hands were trembling, but her chin was up. You did well, I told her. She exhaled slowly. What happens now? Now, I said, they start to find out what they've been standing on. The non-renewal notice reached the Hale estate on a Thursday. My investigator told me later that my son-in-law's mother received it at breakfast and went pale as paper. She'd operated for 31 years under the assumption that the land trust was a dormant relic of her late husband's old dealings. Background paperwork. Nothing that required attention. She'd never had cause to look deeper. She had cause now. By Friday, my attorney had filed the restraining order and opened the forgery case with the district attorney's office. By Friday afternoon, the Hale family's attorney had called mine to request an urgent meeting. I didn't take the meeting. What I did instead was call the board of the Savannah Historic Foundation. They were hosting their annual Preservation Excellence Gala the following Tuesday. An event I'd helped fund for 17 years. An event where my son-in-law's mother had, 3 weeks prior, been announced as this year's honoree for her decades of support for the city's architectural heritage. The gala chairwoman had already been calling me, uncertain how to proceed given the circumstances. I told her to proceed exactly as planned. Are you certain? She asked. Let her have every moment of it, I said. That Sunday, my investigator drove me to Bluffton. Celine's pottery studio was on a side street off Bridge Street, small and full of afternoon sun, with finished pieces arranged in the window. We'd called ahead. She was expecting us. Celine was 37. Dark-haired, careful-eyed, the way people become when they've learned not to give themselves away on first meeting. She'd made tea. We sat at a work table dusted with dried clay, and she told me her story in a measured voice, the voice of someone who has told it over and over in their own head and finally found a room where it could be said aloud. Everything my investigator had reported was true, and more. She spoke for nearly an hour, about how it started, the attention, the sense of being genuinely seen, someone finally paying that specific quality of attention to her. And then, so gradually she couldn't name the moment it changed, the other thing arrived. The way she began to feel slow and stupid. The way she stopped trusting what she knew. The way she stopped calling her sister, then her friends, because she'd been made to feel that all of those people were the real problem, and that the man in her house was the only one who truly understood her. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table and looked at me. I stayed quiet because I was ashamed, she said, and because I didn't think anyone would believe me over them. I believe you, I said, every word of it. She looked at me for a long moment. What do you need from me? your testimony, your willingness to stand in a room and say plainly what happened. I held her gaze. You don't have to, it's entirely your choice. But what you went through isn't just your story, it's evidence of a system. It can protect other people. She looked down at her hands, at the fine trace of clay still in the creases of her knuckles. I've been quiet for 3 years, she said. I don't want to be quiet anymore. Tuesday evening. The Sorrel Weed House dressed in white lights, every room full of Savannah's stewards of history and architecture and old money. Cocktails on the lower veranda, the garden lit warm gold, a string quartet playing something measured and graceful near the fountain. I arrived at 8. I wore a gray silk dress I'd owned for 12 years and never found an occasion quite worthy of. I moved through the room the way I always have, unhurried, observant, taking up exactly the space I needed and no more. My son-in-law's mother stood near the center of the main parlor, receiving compliments with both hands extended, absorbing tribute the way parched ground takes in rain. My son-in-law stood beside her in a dark suit, smiling at all the correct moments. He saw me once across the room. Something passed through his expression. Not quite recognition, something closer to the animal understanding that a situation has shifted. I looked at him calmly for one moment, then I looked away. At 9, the foundation director invited guests into the main hall. 300 people arranged themselves across the space. I stood near the back, beside my attorney, beside Celine, who had driven up from Bluffton in a dark blue dress and was standing very straight and very still. The director spoke about stewardship, about the duty to protect what history has left in our hands. Then he called my son-in-law's mother to the podium. She walked up to the kind of applause that only forms when a room has decided to believe what it's watching. She was gracious at the microphone, perfectly calibrated between humble and proud. She thanked the foundation. She thanked the city. She spoke about generations of care, about legacy. Legacy, she said, is not only what you build, it's what you protect. I took out my phone and sent a single message to my AV consultant in the control booth at the back of the hall. Begin. The foundation had planned a video tribute before presenting the award. A retrospective of the properties she'd helped preserve. My consultant had been brought in as additional technical support for the evening. He was very good at his work. The screen behind the podium lit up. It did not show historic properties. It showed 2 women, 2 recordings, side by side. On the left, Celine, recorded 3 days prior in my kitchen, speaking directly and clearly into the camera. My name is Celine Marsh. I was married to Clayton Hale for 18 months. I am going to tell you what that was like. On the right, my daughter, recorded by my attorney 2 days ago. My name is Dara Whitfield. I was married to Clayton Hale for 4 years. This is what happened. The room went absolutely silent. The 2 recordings played in parallel, not the same words, but unmistakably the same story. The isolation, described in the same phrases, the financial control, the escalation, the removal, the threats that followed. 2 voices, 2 different years, one pattern so clear it could have been drawn with a ruler. My son-in-law's mother turned from the podium and looked at the screen. Her expression didn't collapse, she just stilled. The way still water looks right before it freezes solid. The screen shifted. Documents. The forged refinancing application. My daughter's signature flagged in red beside a forensic examiner's written determination. All signatures on the following pages have been determined to be fraudulent reproductions. Then property records. The Meridian Property Holdings Trust. My name is sole controlling party. The Hale family lease. 31 years of payments, and 1 line in plain bold type. Notice of non-renewal filed with Chatham County Recorder's Office. A man near the front said quietly, "Good Lord." My son-in-law took a step backward. His mother stood very still, hands at her sides. 2 detectives from the sheriff's office, who had been amongst guests for the past hour, walked forward through the crowd. They walked to the front of the room. My son-in-law's mother looked across that glittering hall and found my face. Through 300 people, through all that warm light, she looked directly at me. I looked back. I had nothing to say to her. Everything that needed saying had already been said. Not to her, but to the record. To the room, to the system that had allowed her to do this twice before, without consequence. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the detectives said. My son-in-law said something urgent and sharp. His mother said nothing at all. She put her wrists together and let the handcuffs close around them. They were walked through the room and out through the main entrance. The string quartet had stopped. The hall held one long breath. Then someone began to clap, slowly, then joined. Then the whole room opened up like a window thrown wide. I didn't move. I stood at the back while the sound built and settled around me. Solene was beside me. She didn't speak. I put my hand over hers and we stood there together. 6 weeks later, my son-in-law's mother received 18 months on the forgery charges plus restitution. My son-in-law received 2 years for conspiracy and financial fraud. The Hale estate lease was formally terminated. The property reverted to my control. I gave my daughter first right to the carriage house at fair market rate. She took it. She converted the ground floor into her design studio. Open ceiling, south-facing windows, the quality of light she'd always said she needed. She hung her own work on the walls. She put my granddaughter's drawings up there too, paper horses and crayon suns, taped at whatever height a 5-year-old's reach allows. 2 months after the gala, Celine opened a resource center in Bluffton she called Steady Ground. Legal referrals, counseling access, financial literacy for women in abusive situations. My daughter made the first donation. I matched it. On the afternoon Celine cut the ribbon, the 3 of us stood outside in the late afternoon sun, doing what spring sun does in the Lowcountry, turning everything enormous and gold. My granddaughter was chasing a mockingbird across the parking lot, the stuffed horse dangling from one fist, completely unconcerned with anything except the bird. "She doesn't know anything happened," my daughter said. "Good," I said. "She shouldn't have to. Not yet." We watched my granddaughter stop and study the bird, which had landed on a fence post and was watching her back with absolutely no intention of going anywhere. "Did you always know?" my daughter asked. "About them, about what they were." I thought about how to answer honestly. "I knew enough," I said, "to be ready." She looked at me the way she used to when she was small and was trying to determine if I was keeping something from her. I usually was. It had taken me a long time to understand that what I kept to myself wasn't a wall between us. It was a particular kind of roof, something she'd been standing under her whole life without knowing it was there. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you more," I said. "I think," she said carefully, "you told me what I needed. I always knew you were steady. I knew if I called, you'd come." She had called. I had come. That part, at least, had gone exactly right. My granddaughter came running back across the lot, breathless, the horse bouncing at her side. "Did you see? It just sat there. It wasn't even scared of me." "Smart bird," I said. I crouched down to her level. She considered this very seriously and then laughed. The full, sudden laugh of a child who hasn't yet learned to make herself smaller to fit the room. The kind of laugh you spend a whole life trying to protect. We walked back to the cars together, the 3 of us. The afternoon stretched gold and wide across the low marsh. My granddaughter walked between us, holding both our hands, swinging a little with each step, the horse dangling from her fist, not a worry in the world. We build things so we have something to pass on. We protect things so the people who come after us don't have to start from nothing. That's all I've ever done. That's all I'll keep doing. Before you go, I need you to hear this, not as a story with a tidy ending, but as something I've lived. The people who mean to diminish you are counting entirely on your silence. They build their power out of what you don't say, what you don't do, what you're too afraid to prove. The moment you stop being afraid to prove it, everything they've built starts coming down. My daughter stood on a public sidewalk with her child and 3 bags, and she believed it was over. It wasn't over. It was, as it turned out, the beginning of everything that mattered most. If someone in your life is making you smaller, watching your money, cutting you off from the people who love you, making you doubt what you know to be true, please hear me. That is not love. That is construction. Someone is building a cage and calling it a home. Get in the car. Trust the people who come running when you call. And remember who you were before someone decided you weren't enough. I'm still learning that myself. At 64 years old, I'm still learning. We all are. That's the point. We keep learning, we keep building, and we do not stop. Not ever.